Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into the desolate highways and forgotten backroads of America with the 10 most unsettling true stories of haunted trucker highways. These chilling tales come straight from seasoned long-haul drivers, late-night highway patrol officers, and travelers who have encountered the inexplicable on those seemingly endless stretches of asphalt. Each story is a real-life encounter, pulled from the darkest hours when the road becomes a portal to something much more sinister. These aren't just urban legends or campfire stories. They are genuine experiences shared by drivers who faced pure terror on highways where the normal laws of reality seem to vanish. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily doses of true horror content that will leave you questioning every shadow on the road ahead. Tap that notification bell so you're always alerted when darkness calls from America's highways. Now, let's hit the haunted roads where 18 wheels meet the supernatural and uncover why some paths are best avoided alone after midnight. Marcus Williams had been behind the wheel of 18-wheelers for over 23 years when he encountered something on Interstate 80 in Nebraska that made him rethink everything he knew about the highway system. Marcus was not easily spooked. He had navigated through blizzards that turned roads into ice rinks, tackled mountain passes where one misstep could lead to a 1,000-foot drop, and driven through areas where stopping at red lights was ill-advised. He took pride in being practical, level-headed, and dismissive of the supernatural tales that some drivers broadcast over CB radios during those long, solitary nights. On that particular October evening, Marcus was transporting a load of electronics from California to Chicago, running slightly behind schedule due to an unexpected delay at a way station in Utah. The cargo was both valuable and time-sensitive, requiring him to stick to a strict delivery window. After nearly 11 hours on the road, he was nearing the federal maximum driving limit, but he preferred to push on to the next truck stop rather than stop at one of the smaller rest areas scattered along this stretch of Nebraska highway. The landscape along Interstate 80 was a vast expanse of cornfields reaching to the horizon, occasionally interrupted by farmhouses with porch lights that twinkled like distant stars in the night. As he approached 2 a.m., Marcus noticed flashing lights in his side mirror. Initially, he thought it was a state trooper conducting a routine stop on another vehicle. However, as the lights grew brighter, he realized they were aimed at him. The patrol car pulled alongside his cab, and the officer signaled for him to pull over. Marcus checked his speedometer and confirmed he was traveling right at the posted limit. His logbook was up to date, his inspection certificates were current, and his cargo was securely fastened. Nevertheless, roadside inspections were part of the job, and arguing with law enforcement rarely ended well. He guided his rig onto the shoulder and turned on his hazard lights. The patrol car pulled in behind him, but something felt off. While the vehicle appeared official enough with its standard light bar and government plates, an unsettling feeling crept over him. The paint job didn't quite fit the Nebraska State Patrol. The colors felt off, and the decals were oddly placed. Marcus had encountered highway patrols in countless states over the years and took pride in identifying their various vehicles. Yet this one didn't resemble any he recalled. The officer who approached was a tall man in his 50s, dressed in what appeared to be a standard inspection uniform. His badge glimmered in the light of Marcus's headlights, and he held a clipboard along with a digital inspection device that seemed legitimate. However, when he spoke, his voice had a peculiar echo, as if he were conversing from within a vast empty space instead of on an open highway. "Good evening, driver. I'm Inspector Thompson with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. I need to perform a routine inspection of your vehicle and cargo documentation." His tone was professional and textbook, yet something about his presence unsettled Marcus. His eyes reflected light unnaturally, and his smile revealed unnaturally white, perfectly aligned teeth. Marcus handed over his commercial driver's license, medical certificate, and logbook through the window. Inspector Thompson scrutinized each document with an unusual intensity, gliding his fingers over the pages as if he could decipher invisible information. After a prolonged silence, he looked up at Marcus with those oddly reflective eyes. "You're transporting electronics, right? Specifically, laptop computers, tablets, and smartphone components for distribution centers in Illinois." Thompson's claim was spot on. Yet Marcus hadn't shared any details about his cargo. The shipping documents were sealed in an envelope in his sleeper berth, and the trailer doors had remained closed since he left the loading dock in California. "Ah, how did you know that?" Marcus asked, striving to keep his voice calm. "I haven't shown you the cargo manifest yet." Inspector Thompson flashed that disconcerting, flawless smile. I know many things about your cargo, Marcus Williams of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I know you're carrying $47,000 worth of electronics. I know you're running 2 hours and 15 minutes late on your delivery. I also know you've been divorced for 6 years, and your ex-wife Rebecca still calls you every Thursday evening to discuss your daughter Sarah's college expenses. A chill ran through Marcus. The cargo value and delivery delay were accurate, but the personal details about his family were information that no DOT inspector should possess. His ex-wife did indeed call him every Thursday, and their conversations always revolved around their daughter's education costs. This was not information available in any government database accessible to a highway inspector. "I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said, reaching for his CB radio to call for help. I'd like to contact my dispatcher to confirm this inspection." Inspector Thompson abruptly reached through the window, seizing Marcus's wrist with surprising speed. His grip was icily cold and unnaturally strong, and Marcus felt what seemed like electricity coursing through the man's fingers. "There's no mistake, Marcus. I've been anticipating your arrival. Your cargo holds more than just electronics. In trailer position 7 Alpha 3, there are items that aren't listed on your manifest, items that some parties are quite eager to obtain." Thompson's voice had shifted, deepening and resonating with a newfound intensity, while his eyes seemed to radiate an inner light. Marcus had personally loaded his trailer and overseen the entire operation. Every item had been scanned, documented, and the trailer securely sealed with tamper-evident locks, all of which remained intact. There was no 7 Alpha 3 in his cargo layout, and nothing had been loaded without proper documentation. "You're misunderstanding something," Marcus stammered, his voice trembling. "My cargo was loaded under strict supervision, and everything is properly documented." Inspector Thompson released his grip and stepped back from the truck, pulling out a small black device that resembled a GPS tracker combined with a radio transmitter. "This will keep track of your journey from here on out. Don't try to remove it, and stay on your planned route. More instructions will come once you arrive at your destination." Before Marcus could protest, Thompson affixed the device to the underside of his driver's side mirror with an adhesive that bonded instantly to the metal. The device began to emit a soft blue glow, along with a barely audible hum. "What is that thing?" Marcus asked, alarmed. "You can't attach tracking devices to commercial vehicles without proper authorization." Inspector Thompson was already striding back to his patrol car. "But safe travels, Marcus. Just remember, I'll be keeping an eye on your progress." He climbed into his vehicle, which roared to life with a sound far too powerful for a standard patrol car. As it drove away, Marcus noticed its headlights casting shadows in odd directions, while the red taillights left trails in the air like blood. In an instant, the vehicle vanished, completely gone, as if it had never been there. Marcus sat in his cab for several minutes, trying to wrap his mind around what had just transpired. The device on his mirror continued to hum and pulse with blue light. He thought about removing it, but Thompson's warning played in his head, and he sensed that tampering with it could lead to serious consequences. He resumed his journey, but almost immediately, the electronic systems in his truck began to act erratically. His GPS flickered between his current location and unfamiliar places. The radio picked up strange transmissions in languages he couldn't understand, and his CB radio crackled with conversations from truck drivers long since past. Every few miles, Marcus caught glimpses of the patrol car in his mirrors, always keeping the same distance, yet never appearing directly behind him. The device continued its rhythmic pulsing and humming, and he started to notice that other vehicles on the highway seemed to steer clear of his truck, as if they sensed something unsettling about his cargo. By the time he reached his destination in Illinois, he hadn't slept for over 30 hours and was starting to question his own sanity. The device had wreaked havoc on every electronic system in his truck, causing his logbook to record hours. He brushed it off and kept driving. As he climbed the incline, the other truck remained a steady presence in his mirrors, its headlights flickering in and out of sight with the changing landscape. Daniel checked the clock. It was getting late, and fatigue from the long day was starting to set in. He decided to speed up a bit, hoping to create some distance between himself and the quiet truck trailing him. No matter how fast he drove, though, the other truck kept pace, neither gaining nor losing ground. It felt like they were caught in an unspoken competition, and Daniel couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the driver behind him was watching closely. The road twisted and turned through the mountains, heightening his unease. He switched on the radio, hoping to drown out his thoughts with music, but all he got was static, blending with the rushing wind outside. Stealing another glance in the mirror, he briefly thought he spotted something odd, a shadowy figure in the passenger seat of the truck behind him. His heart raced, and he shook his head, convincing himself it was just his tired mind playing tricks. He focused on the road ahead, but the sensation of being observed persisted. With each mile that passed, the isolation of Highway 50 seeped deeper into his bones, and the haunting silence of the night loomed larger around him. Daniel brushed it off at first. As he reached the top of the hill and started down into the next valley, he took a quick look in his mirrors and felt a twinge of unease. The truck trailing him looked exactly like his. Same model, same color scheme, same running lights. While this wasn't unheard of, many large trucking companies have fleets of identical vehicles, and owner-operators often choose popular models. It still felt strange. What truly unsettled Daniel was the truck's behavior. It kept the same distance behind him, no matter how fast he was going. When he sped up on downhill stretches, it did too. When he slowed for curves, it mirrored him perfectly. When he signaled to change lanes around slower traffic, the mysterious truck's turn signals blinked in perfect harmony with his. Daniel tried the CB radio again. "Mirror truck, this is the furniture hauler. You're riding a bit too close for comfort there, buddy. Mind backing off?" No response. He switched to Channel 9, the emergency frequency, and then tried a few other common trucking channels. While the radio picked up distant chatter from other parts of Nevada, the truck behind him remained silent. As the night wore on, Daniel's unease about his unwelcome companion grew. During a fuel stop in Austin, he kept a close eye on his mirrors as he pulled into the truck stop parking lot. The phantom truck zoomed past without slowing down, disappearing into the darkness outside the reach of the parking lot lights. He felt a wave of relief, thinking the other driver was simply on a different schedule. But as he got back on Highway 50, after refueling and taking his mandatory break, he noticed those headlights in his mirrors again. The phantom truck had returned, sticking to the same unnerving distance as before. This time, Daniel was certain something was off. He had been parked for over an hour, and there hadn't been any other trucks at the fuel stop. Where had that truck been waiting? He pressed the gas, pushing his engine harder than usual on the empty highway. But the phantom truck mirrored his speed perfectly. He slowed down significantly, but his follower did the same. When he turned on his hazard lights, the phantom truck's hazards blinked in sync. Fear began to replace his curiosity as the realization hit him. This was beyond normal. Grabbing his cell phone to call his dispatcher, he found he had no signal, despite being in an area where he typically had good coverage. The CB radio was still functional, but every attempt to reach out to the mysterious truck ended in silence. Daniel decided to confront his pursuer more directly. He pulled off at a rest area near Cold Springs, carefully reducing his speed and signaling his turn. The phantom truck's signal blinked in response, but instead of following him into the rest area, it sped past and vanished down the highway. Parked, Daniel circled around his truck, checking for any equipment that might be broadcasting his location or transmitting his signals. He found nothing out of the ordinary. His truck had standard GPS tracking for insurance and an electronic logging device, but neither could explain the strange behavior of the phantom truck. He lingered at the rest area for 20 minutes, hoping his pursuer would drive past on the highway and leave him be. But when he finally merged back onto Highway 50, dread washed over him as the familiar headlights appeared in his mirrors just moments later. The ghostly truck had been lurking in the shadows, poised to resume its unnerving chase. Daniel decided to switch tactics. He started weaving between lanes, varying his speed wildly and signaling randomly, moves no sensible driver would replicate. Yet the phantom truck mirrored his every maneuver, as if tethered to his vehicle by an unseen force. When Daniel flashed his headlights, the ghost truck responded in kind. When he tapped his brakes, its brake lights flickered in sync. The tension escalated as he neared the summit of another mountain pass. In the crisp desert air, he could see for miles. The highway ahead was utterly deserted. No headlights approached, no taillights faded over distant hills, and no other vehicles were in sight. Still, the phantom truck doggedly trailed him, its lights glinting in his mirrors like the gaze of a mechanical predator. Daniel squinted to get a better look at his pursuer, adjusting his mirrors and switching on his cab dome light to cut down the glare. What he saw sent chills down his spine. The truck seemed to be an exact replica of his own. Same cab layout, same trailer model, same company logos, and DOT numbers. It was as if someone had crafted a flawless copy of his rig just to torment him. As dawn approached, exhaustion and fear weighed heavily on Daniel. He had been driving all night with this enigmatic companion, his nerves frayed from the unshakable tension of being followed by something that defied reason. The phantom truck maintained its distance, never attempting to overtake him or respond to his gestures. Daniel resolved to take one last gamble. He would halt his truck in the middle of the highway, forcing his pursuer to show its true intentions. The highway was quiet enough for him to safely block both lanes without risking other drivers. He gradually slowed down, noticing the phantom truck decelerate in tandem. When he finally stopped his truck in the center of the highway, the ghostly vehicle halted precisely a quarter-mile behind him. Both trucks stood still in the pre-dawn gloom, engines idling, their headlights casting pools of light onto the empty asphalt. Grabbing a flashlight, Daniel stepped out of his cab, his heart racing as he prepared to confront the unknown driver. As he walked back toward the phantom truck, he noticed the distance between them remained unchanged, as if it were retreating at the same pace he was advancing. After what felt like 10 minutes of walking, he realized he hadn't made any progress. The headlights stayed just as far away, and his own truck was now barely a faint glow behind him. This couldn't be happening. Highway 50 was a straight shot here, and he should have easily covered that quarter mile. Panic surged within him, and he turned to sprint back to his truck, fear obliterating any trace of rational thought. As he ran, he caught a glimpse of the phantom truck's daylight hours. As she cruised along the empty stretch of Interstate 10, the rhythmic hum of the engine was almost soothing. But that night felt different. A sense of unease crept over her as the shadows danced along the roadside, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, steadily closing in. Emma's heart raced as the truck maintained a relentless pace behind her, just out of reach. She glanced at her speedometer, ensuring she was within the limits, but the feeling of being pursued intensified. When she pulled into a rest area, the phantom truck remained in her sight, yet it never got close enough for her to make out any details. As dawn broke, the truck's headlights dimmed until they vanished into the morning light. The highway behind her was deserted, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Emma continued on to Phoenix, delivering her load on time, but the eerie encounter lingered in her mind. Intrigued, she delved into the history of Interstate 10, uncovering tales of other drivers who had reported similar experiences, an unexplained truck that seemed to shadow them until the break of day, only to disappear without a trace. Some suggested the sightings were tricks of the light, while others attributed them to the fatigue-induced hallucinations common among long-haul drivers. Emma, however, was certain of what she had witnessed, and the incident left a lasting impression on her. Years later, when fellow truckers asked for advice on routes through Texas, she would always steer them toward the safer, more traveled highways, sharing her experiences with a knowing smile. While the phantom truck never pursued her on other paths, on particularly dark nights, she sometimes caught a glimpse of headlights in her mirrors, maintaining that same eerie distance, as if waiting for her to return to the haunting expanses of Interstate 10. During the sweltering heat of the day, Emma typically took breaks at truck stops with reliable air conditioning and decent dining options. As midnight approached, she spotted a figure beside the highway about 2 miles east of Junction. At first, she thought it might be a stranded driver whose vehicle had broken down. But when her headlights lit up the area, she saw no disabled car in sight. Instead, a woman in her 30s stood calmly on the shoulder, dressed in a white gown and holding what looked like a small suitcase. She wasn't frantically waving or showing signs of panic. She simply stood there as if she were waiting for a bus. Emma's instinct was to keep driving. Picking up hitchhikers went against company policy for most trucking companies. As a female driver on her own, she was particularly strict about her rules regarding strangers, especially in desolate areas. Yet, something about the woman's calm presence, coupled with the absence of other vehicles, made Emma rethink her decision. The closest town was over 50 miles away. If this woman was truly stranded, she might be in serious trouble from exposure, or worse. Activating her hazard lights, Emma slowed down and used her CB radio to inform any nearby drivers of her actions. Eastbound four-wheeler or anyone else listening, I'm stopping to check on what looks like a stranded motorist at mile marker 207 on Interstate 10. Just wanted to let someone know my location in case anything goes wrong. As she brought her truck to a halt on the shoulder, the woman approached the passenger side with a calm, deliberate stride. Under the glow of the truck's running lights, Emma could see that the woman was attractive and well-dressed, although her formal white dress seemed out of place in such a remote area. Her hair was impeccably styled, and she carried herself with an air of confidence that suggested she was used to being in control. Emma rolled down the passenger window but kept the engine running and the transmission in gear, ready to leave if the situation felt threatening. "Ma'am, are you having car troubles? Do you need assistance?" The woman smiled, her voice clear and pleasant. "Thank you for stopping. I'm Patricia, and I would greatly appreciate a ride. I need to get to the next town as fast as I can." Her refined accent hinted that she wasn't from this rural part of Texas. "Where's your vehicle?" Emma asked, scanning the surroundings with her spotlight. "I don't see any broken-down cars around here." Patricia's smile remained, but something flickered in her eyes. "My vehicle is no longer important. Time is of the essence, and there's something you need to know about the road ahead." Despite her better judgment, Emma found herself unlocking the passenger door. Patricia gracefully climbed into the cab, settling into the passenger seat and placing her small suitcase on the floor. As soon as she was seated, Emma was hit by a powerful scent of funeral flowers, the heavy, sweet aroma of lilies and roses that reminded her of memorial services and cemetery visits. "What do you mean about the road ahead?" Emma asked, as she merged back onto the highway. "Is there construction or an accident I should be aware of?" Patricia turned to face Emma directly, her eyes reflecting the dashboard lights. The lights flickered in an odd manner. Roughly 47 miles ahead, just beyond the rest area near Comfort Wells, a collision was imminent. A drunk driver in a pickup truck would cross the median and collide with a family traveling in a sedan. The crash would happen precisely at 12:53 a.m. A shiver ran down Emma's spine. Patricia spoke with the calmness of someone delivering a weather forecast, but the accuracy of her words was unsettling. How could she possibly know such details? Were her connections with law enforcement? "I have insights into many things that will unfold tonight," Patricia responded. The family in the sedan comprised a mother, father, and their 2 young children, returning home from a visit with relatives in San Antonio. The intoxicated driver was a ranch worker who had been drinking at a bar in Caraville for the last 4 hours. He would doze off just before the impact. Emma gripped the steering wheel tighter. The woman beside her appeared entirely rational and composed, yet her statements were unfathomable. "Listen, Patricia, I think you might be mistaken. No one can predict accidents with such precision." Patricia reached over, placing her icy hand on Emma's forearm. The chill seeped through the fabric of her long-sleeved shirt. "You must trust me. Emma Rodriguez from San Angelo, Texas. You need to call the state police and report a suspected drunk driver. Provide them with the license plate number Alpha Charlie 7492. Inform them he's driving a red Ford pickup truck and heading north on Highway 16, nearing Interstate 10. Emma hadn't told Patricia her name or where she lived. That information wasn't visible anywhere in the truck, and she hadn't mentioned it during their brief chat. A wave of fear began to eclipse her curiosity as she realized she was facing something inexplicable. "How do you know my name?" Emma asked, struggling to maintain her composure. How do you know where I'm from?" "I possess knowledge about many things that were, are, and will be," Patricia replied. "I know you've been driving trucks for 8 years. I know your father taught you to drive in his grain truck when you were 14. I know you're saving to start your own trucking company one day. All of this was true, but it was information no stranger should reasonably have. Emma had never shared her background or dreams with anyone outside her family and closest friends. The coldness of Patricia's hand seemed to spread, numbing her skin and sending waves of unnatural chill coursing through her. Please make the call, Patricia urged. The family in the sedan includes 8-year-old Maria and 6-year-old Carlos. They've just visited their grandmother and are carrying gifts she made for them. Maria has a hand-knitted sweater, and Carlos has a wooden toy truck carved by their grandfather. With trembling fingers, Emma reached for her cell phone. She had no rational explanation for what was occurring, but something in Patricia's voice urged her to act. As she dialed 911, she noticed that Patricia's reflection was missing from the passenger window, even with the interior lights on and the woman sitting right next to the glass. 911. What is your emergency? Emma started. This is going to sound strange, but I have reason to believe there's a drunk driver on Highway 16 approaching Interstate 10. The vehicle is a red Ford pickup truck with license plate Alpha Charlie 7492. The dispatcher requested Emma's location and contact details, reassuring her that units would be sent to investigate. As she hung up, Emma turned to express her gratitude to Patricia for the information, only to find the passenger seat empty. The suitcase was gone, and the overpowering scent of funeral flowers had vanished, replaced by the familiar odors of diesel fuel and the open highway. Emma quickly pulled over and searched the truck, but Patricia had seemingly disappeared without a sound or even opening the door. The passenger seat still bore the impression of someone who had just been sitting there, yet there was no other sign of anyone else in the cab. For nearly an hour, Emma sat on the shoulder of Interstate 10, grappling with what had just occurred. She considered the possibility that it might have all been a hallucination brought on by fatigue or stress. But the 911 call had been real, and the dispatcher would have a record of her report about the drunk driver. At around 1:15 a.m., Emma's CB radio crackled to life with urgent traffic updates. Attention all eastbound and westbound traffic on Interstate 10. A serious accident has occurred at mile marker 247 near Comfort Wells. Emergency vehicles are responding and traffic is being diverted. A chill ran through Emma. Mile marker 247 was precisely 47 miles from where she had picked up Patricia, and the timing was uncanny. She attempted to contact other truckers on the radio for more details about the accident, but information was scarce due to the ongoing emergency. As traffic slowly resumed, Emma passed the scene of the crash and was struck by the horrific aftermath of a head-on collision. A red pickup truck had crossed the median and collided with a sedan, leaving both vehicles utterly wrecked. Emergency responders were loading covered stretchers into ambulances, and floodlights cast harsh shadows over the mangled metal. A state trooper was directing traffic around the wreckage, and Emma recognized him from previous highway inspections. She rolled down her window as she drove by. "Officer Martinez, Was this the drunk driver incident reported earlier? The trooper looked at her with weary eyes. Yeah, we got the call just in time. Units intercepted the pickup truck about 2 miles before he would have hit the interstate. The driver was barely conscious, with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. We probably saved some lives tonight. Emma kept driving, but her mind was elsewhere. Patricia had known exactly when and where the accident would take place, and her information had averted a tragedy that could have claimed an entire family's life. Yet Patricia had vanished without a trace, leaving only the memory of her icy touch and the lingering scent of funeral flowers. In the weeks that followed, Emma delved into missing persons reports and accident records, searching for any sign of a woman named Patricia, who resembled her enigmatic passenger. She discovered several Patricias who had died in vehicle accidents on Texas highways over the last decade, but none were an exact match. Emma never picked up another hitchhiker and refrained from discussing the encounter with other drivers or family members. She knew they would dismiss her experience as highway hypnosis or think she had concocted an elaborate story to rationalize her lucky guess about the drunk driver. Emma was certain that her experiences were genuine, and she believed Patricia had come into her life to avert a catastrophe that could have claimed innocent lives. On particularly dark nights, while driving along desolate stretches of highway, she would catch a whiff of funeral flowers in her cab, accompanied by a chilling presence in the passenger seat. Emma learned to embrace these moments, understanding that Patricia was still vigilantly watching over the roads, preventing disasters that only she could anticipate. Although Emma never saw Patricia again, she kept her phone charged and ready, aware that one day she might receive another message from the beyond. An opportunity to save lives on the shadowy highways where the worlds of the living and the dead intersect in urgent moments of need. George Patterson had been transporting freight across Oklahoma for 12 years when he stumbled upon a way station that existed in a realm between reality and the impossible. A meticulous driver, George took pride in his knowledge of every truck route, way station, and inspection point between Dallas and Kansas City. He maintained detailed logs of fuel stops, mandatory inspection locations, and timing schedules that enabled him to optimize his driving hours while adhering to federal transportation regulations. On that particular December evening, George was transporting a load of agricultural equipment from Oklahoma City to Topeka, perfectly on schedule, despite a prior delay from construction on Interstate 35. The weather was clear and chilly, with temperatures dipping near freezing as night descended upon the Oklahoma plains. George had accurately calculated his fuel needs and knew he could reach his destination without a stop, but federal regulations mandated a 10-hour rest period before he could continue. The stretch of Interstate 40 between Oklahoma City and the Arkansas border was familiar ground for George. He had navigated this route countless times, knowing the locations of every way station, rest area, and truck stop. The Oklahoma Department of Transportation operated 2 permanent way stations along this highway, both equipped with electronic screening systems, allowing compliant trucks to bypass inspection if their weight and safety records were satisfactory. As midnight approached, George spotted the way station ahead. Initially, everything appeared normal. The familiar blue signs were positioned at standard intervals, indicating that commercial vehicles needed to stop for inspection. Electronic message boards displayed the usual warnings about weight limits and safety regulations. Everything seemed routine until George began to slow down for the inspection area. The way station looked just like many others he had encountered over the years. Standard government buildings painted in regulation colors, electronic scales embedded in the pavement, and inspection bays illuminated by overhead lights. Yet, from the moment George guided his truck onto the scale platform, something felt off. The building appeared slightly out of focus, as if viewed through distorted water or heat haze. Despite the frigid December air, a uniformed inspector emerged from the building and approached George's cab. The man, seemingly in his 50s, wore a standard Department of Transportation uniform, adorned with proper badges and identification. However, "There's nothing unusual about my load," George replied, trying to sound confident. The inspector's gaze sharpened, and he leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if revealing a secret. "You might think that, but the truth often hides beneath the surface. What you're carrying isn't just metal and machinery. It holds a weight that goes beyond the physical." George's heart raced as the inspector's words replayed in his mind. He felt a strong urge to run, but the inspector's presence anchored him in place. "I promise there's nothing wrong with my cargo," George urged, desperation creeping into his tone. "I just want to complete my delivery and go home." The inspector straightened, his expression unreadable. "You will finish your delivery, but first, we need to uncover what's hidden." With that, he motioned for George to step out of the truck, and, despite every instinct telling him to resist, George felt an undeniable compulsion to comply. "My cargo is perfectly ordinary," George asserted. The inspector reached into his pocket and produced what looked like a typical electronic scale, but the numbers it displayed were utterly baffling. Instead of showing weight in pounds or tons, the screen flickered with unfamiliar terms: soul density, guilt mass, and temporal displacement. "You're carrying the weight of every mistake you've ever made," the inspector explained. "Every lie, every broken promise, every time you opted for the easy route instead of the right one. This burden has been piling up for years and has now reached a point that demands official attention." George's mind raced as he tried to comprehend this revelation. The inspector implied that guilt and regret had a tangible weight, measurable like cargo. It seemed absurd, yet the device continued to flash numbers that linked to specific memories and choices from George's life. This is crazy," George protested, though his conviction wavered. "Emotions can't be weighed." "Guilt isn't a physical thing." The inspector pointed at the readout. Our instruments indicate you're carrying about 437 pounds of unresolved guilt from an accident you caused 15 years ago. You never reported it, and an innocent family suffered due to your negligence." A chill gripped George. He remembered that day all too clearly, driving through a construction zone in Arkansas when his trailer brushed against a concrete barrier, sending debris into the path of another vehicle. A family car had swerved, flipping over and injuring two children. He had kept driving, convincing himself it wasn't his fault, and that stopping would only complicate matters. "Ah, how do you know about that?" he whispered, panic rising. There had been no witnesses, no police report. "We know everything," the inspector replied. "Every secret, every hidden shame, every burden you carry. These weights accumulate over time, and eventually they must be confronted." George glanced around the way station and noticed the building and equipment blurring, as if they were evaporating from existence. The inspector himself appeared to be becoming more translucent with each passing moment. "What do you want from me?" George asked, fear eclipsing his reason. "The choice is yours," the inspector said. "You can keep carrying this weight, letting it grow heavier until it crushes your spirit, or you can release it here, confess your failures, and accept the consequences." George sat in his truck, feeling like hours had slipped by, even though only minutes had ticked away on his dashboard. The way station around him continued to dissolve, resembling a fading dream. The inspector waited patiently, his form becoming increasingly ethereal as George wrestled with his decision. At last, George made up his mind. He reached for his cell phone and dialed the Arkansas State Police. When the dispatcher answered, he inhaled deeply and began, "I need to report an accident that happened 15 years ago on Interstate 40 near Little Rock." Maria always took extra care when driving through this stretch of road. As she neared the infamous spot, a wave of unease washed over her, but she pushed the feeling aside and concentrated on the road ahead. Suddenly, her CB radio crackled with a panicked voice, warning of an accident up ahead. Her heart raced as she eased off the accelerator, scanning for any signs of trouble. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something strange on the shoulder, a figure cloaked in mist. As she drove by, she could have sworn she glimpsed a man, his face etched with desperation. Disturbed, Maria pressed on, but the image stuck with her. She couldn't shake the sensation that this figure was somehow linked to the road's tragic past. Determined to remain vigilant, she kept her eyes wide open for any signs of danger, while her mind buzzed with questions about the mysterious sighting. Maria had always felt a twinge of anxiety traveling through this area, particularly at night when visibility was poor. As she neared 11 p.m., she first picked up the voice on her CB radio. She was tuned into Channel 19, the go-to frequency for truck drivers, when a male voice cut through the static with an unsettling clarity. "Attention southbound traffic on Interstate 95. Be advised there's a serious hazard ahead at mile marker 43. Repeat, a major obstruction is blocking the right lane at mile marker 43. Exercise extreme caution." The warning was issued with a professional tone, but something about it sent a chill down Maria's spine. The voice sounded hollow and distant, as if it were coming from a vast empty space or an underground tunnel. Having monitored CB traffic for years, Maria had never encountered anything like this. She checked her GPS and confirmed that mile marker 43 was just about 15 miles ahead of her. She keyed her microphone to respond, hoping to gather more information. "Thanks for the alert, driver. This is the southbound textile hauler at mile marker 28. Can you provide more details about the hazard?" She waited for a reply, but was met only with static. A few minutes later, that same voice returned, sending a shiver through her. "Southbound textile hauler, this is Jimmy Patterson, speaking from beyond the hazard at mile marker 43. My overturned truck. I jackknifed during a fog bank on November 15th, 2019. My trailer is still blocking the right lane, so please move to the left to avoid a collision." Maria's hands shook on the steering wheel. The voice had singled her out specifically as the textile hauler, despite her not revealing any information about her cargo during her earlier transmission. The notion that the speaker was transmitting from beyond hinted at something otherworldly, sending her mind racing. She tried to dismiss it as some elaborate prank by another driver, perhaps using past conversations to craft a convincing ghost story. Yet the voice had referenced a specific accident date and location that could be checked against public records. In a bid to find clarity, Maria called her dispatcher, wanting to verify if there were any current road hazards or recent incidents in the area. The dispatcher contacted the South Carolina Department of Transportation and confirmed that Interstate 95 was clear, with no reported obstructions or accidents. As she approached mile marker 43, Maria slowed down and turned on her hazard lights, scanning the road for any signs of danger. Everything appeared normal. The pavement was clear, visibility was good, and there were no obstructions in either lane. She passed the spot without any issues, but the eerie CB transmission left her feeling unnerved. "Jimmy Patterson, this is the southbound textile hauler. I just went by mile marker 43 and didn't see any hazards. Can you clarify where you are?" Maria transmitted, hoping for a logical explanation. The response was immediate, echoing in that same hollow, distant tone that felt as if it was coming from somewhere far beyond. Maria Santos of Jacksonville, Florida. You drove past the spot where my physical truck came to a halt, but my spirit truck will be there forever. I lost my life in that accident, trapped in my cab when my trailer flipped during a jackknife. Since then, I've been trying to alert other drivers about the perilous area. That evening, Maria hadn't shared her name or her hometown during any of her CB transmissions. There was nothing on the outside of her truck indicating who she was, and she hadn't discussed personal details with anyone throughout her trip. As she began to grasp the reality of what she was facing, fears started to take over her rational thoughts. "This has to be some kind of sick joke," Maria transmitted, her voice trembling. "There's no way you could know my name or where I live." Suddenly, multiple voices erupted on the CB frequency, creating an eerie symphony of distant transmissions that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Maria instantly recognized the pattern from her years of listening to truck radio chatter, but these weren't the usual driver conversations. "This is Robert Hayes, killed in a head-on collision at mile marker 37 on March 8, 2021. Watch for ice on the bridge approaches. Maria, black ice took my life. This is Danny Morrison. Died in a multi-vehicle pileup at mile marker 51 during heavy fog on October 3, 2018. Visibility can drop to 0 without warning in this area. Slow down and use your hazard lights. This is Carl Thompson, jackknifed and burned at mile marker 39 on June 22, 2020. My trailer was carrying chemicals that exploded on impact. The road still remembers the fire. The voices kept coming, each detailing specific accidents, dates, and locations along Interstate 95, the road Maria was currently on. Some warned of weather hazards. Others spoke of mechanical failures, and several mentioned drunk or distracted drivers who had caused fatal crashes. Maria pulled over at the next rest area and spent nearly an hour digging into the accidents mentioned in the CB transmissions. Using her cell phone, she found news articles and state police records that confirmed every single incident recounted by the mysterious voices. Jimmy Patterson had indeed perished in a jackknife accident at mile marker 43 in November 2019. Robert Hayes had been killed in a head-on collision at mile marker 37 in March 2021. Each accident matched exactly what the voices on the CB radio had described. The most unsettling part was how much they knew about her personally. They had her full name, hometown, type of cargo, and even private details about her family that weren't public knowledge. It felt as if they had been watching her for years, speaking with an intimate understanding of her fears, concerns, and driving habits. As Maria got ready to continue her journey, the CB radio crackled with one last chilling transmission that made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about death and the afterlife. Maria Santos, this is the collective voice of all drivers who have died on this stretch of highway. We remain here to warn the living about the dangers that persist. Our deaths were not in vain if we can prevent others from meeting the same fate. Heed our warnings, drive safely, and remember that some roads carry memories that never fade. Maria completed her journey to Savannah, reached her destination without any incidents, but the experience left her profoundly unsettled. Intrigued, she delved into the history of Interstate 95 in South Carolina and uncovered that the 20-meter stretch where she had heard the eerie voices was notorious for one of the highest fatal accident rates in the southeastern United States. Over the past 15 years, more than 40 truck drivers had tragically lost their lives in that corridor, victims of various factors including weather, mechanical failures, and human mistakes. Determined to document her experiences, she began carrying a digital recorder on her future trips through South Carolina, hoping to capture the mysterious CB transmissions. Each time she passed through that accident-prone area. The voices returned, offering precise warnings about dangers that had yet to confront other drivers. These alerts were consistently accurate, helping Maria steer clear of everything from construction holdups to weather-related hazards. Interestingly, she never heard the voices on any other highway or in any other state. They seemed uniquely tethered to that particular stretch of Interstate 95, bound by an otherworldly commitment to safeguard fellow drivers from the fate they had suffered. Over time, Maria came to appreciate their warnings, understanding that the spirits of those deceased drivers were striving to avert further tragedies in the very place where their lives had been cut short. Gradually, she began to recognize individual voices among the chorus of lost souls. Jimmy Patterson was the most frequent communicator, often providing detailed weather updates and traffic insights. Robert Hayes focused on alerts about reckless drivers and potential collisions, while Danny Morrison had an uncanny knack for predicting mechanical issues before they escalated. These voices never sought anything in return for their guidance. They existed solely to protect living drivers from the dangers that had claimed their own lives. Maria started to think of them as guardian angels who chose to linger on the highway instead of moving on to whatever lay beyond. Years later, as Maria retired from long-haul trucking, she embarked on one last journey through the fateful corridor of Interstate 95. The familiar CB voices welcomed her back, sharing their usual warnings and advice. As she passed mile marker 43 for the final time, Jimmy Patterson's voice resonated through the radio one last time. "Safe travels, Maria Santos. Thank you for heeding our warnings and sharing our stories. May your journey through life be safer than ours were in death." Although Maria never heard the voices again, she always kept her CB radio tuned to Channel 19 whenever she drove through South Carolina, confident that somewhere along Interstate 95, the spirits of fallen truckers continued to watch over the road, striving to protect other drivers from joining their eternal watch in the corridor where far too many journeys had ended in tragedy. Meanwhile, James Mitchell had been hauling freight through the Colorado Rockies for 14 years when he encountered something on Interstate 70 that challenged every principle of physics and geography he thought he understood. A specialist in mountain driving, James adeptly navigated the perilous passes and steep grades linking Denver to the western slope communities beyond the Continental Divide. He took pride in knowing every twist, elevation change, and potential hazard between the Front Range and the Utah border, with the Eisenhower Tunnel section of Interstate 70 proving particularly daunting as it ascended to, towering over 11,000 feet above sea level, presented a daunting challenge for less experienced drivers. James had traversed this route countless times, transporting everything from building supplies to consumer products along the spine of the Rocky Mountains. He was intimately familiar with the locations of runaway truck ramps, the best gear choices for steep declines, and the weather patterns that could turn an ordinary drive into a fight for survival. On that February evening, he was transporting machinery parts from Denver to Grand Junction, maintaining his schedule even after earlier delays due to chain requirements on Vail Pass. The weather was crisp and clear, with temperatures well below freezing and visibility enhanced by a sky dotted with stars. After meticulously checking his route and confirming that all mountain passes were open and safe for winter driving, he navigated the Eisenhower Tunnel without incident. As he began his descent toward Silverthorne, he noticed something strange about the mile markers. Normally reliable green signs that indicated distance and location along the interstate seemed off. Instead of the expected ascending numbers, they were counting down. Initially, James thought it might be a glitch in his GPS, as mountainous terrain could sometimes disrupt signals, leading to temporary inaccuracies. But as he continued, it became clear that the mile markers were actually decreasing, suggesting he was headed in the wrong direction. Pulling over to the next available shoulder, he checked his compass, GPS, and paper maps. All confirmed he was headed westbound on Interstate 70 toward Grand Junction, just as planned. Yet the mile markers persisted in counting backwards. The first marker after the Eisenhower Tunnel should have shown 205, indicating his distance from the Kansas border, but instead it read 195. The numbers continued to drop. 194, then 193, then 192. While he was moving forward, the signs indicated he was going backward. James attempted to make sense of the situation. Could the Colorado Department of Transportation have put up temporary signs during construction that displayed incorrect figures? But he saw no construction zones or temporary traffic devices anywhere on the highway. The mile markers looked like permanent fixtures in their usual spots. As he resumed driving, he noticed another oddity. His fuel gauge was behaving strangely. Despite keeping the engine running and maintaining highway speeds, the fuel level remained unchanged. The needle, instead of dropping, as it typically would in the mountains, stayed steady, and his electronic fuel monitoring system showed no sign of diesel consumption. The landscape around Interstate 70 also felt slightly off. James knew this stretch of highway like the back of his hand, yet the mountains seemed to shift in a way that was unsettling. The valleys and landmarks around him didn't align with his memories of the landscape. Peaks that should have been visible in the distance were absent, replaced by unfamiliar ridge lines. The Dillon Reservoir, which he expected to see from certain viewpoints, was nowhere in sight. James attempted to reach out to other drivers on his CB radio, hoping to confirm his location and the road conditions. But the radio remained quiet, despite being set to the standard trucking frequency. He could hear static and occasional distant chatter, but no local traffic or familiar voices from the drivers he usually encountered on this route. The mile markers counted down backwards as James ventured deeper into what felt like an alternate version of the Colorado Rockies. Although the highway appeared normal with proper lane markings, guardrails, and signs, the surrounding scenery grew increasingly strange. Trees were arranged in ways that didn't correspond to the usual vegetation patterns of the high country, and the snow cover seemed out of sync with the elevation and weather he had noted earlier. A rising sense of claustrophobia enveloped him, as if the mountains were closing in. The valley that Interstate 70 typically traversed felt narrower and more confined than he remembered. The highway twisted more sharply and ascended more steeply than usual, creating a sense of being ensnared in a labyrinth of asphalt and stone. After what felt like hours of driving, James realized he hadn't seen another vehicle. Interstate 70 usually buzzed with commercial and passenger traffic, even late at night. The complete absence of other drivers was unsettling, especially since he had encountered normal traffic levels before entering the Eisenhower Tunnel. The mile markers counted down from 195 to 150, suggesting he had supposedly traveled 45 miles in the wrong direction. Yet, his odometer showed he had actually driven 45 miles forward, and his GPS continued to indicate westbound progress toward Grand Junction. The conflicting readings from different measurement systems made no sense. Deciding to turn around, James looked for the next median crossover to reverse direction and began heading east, back toward the Eisenhower Tunnel. However, as he drove the opposite way, the mile markers still counted down. Instead of increasing numbers indicating a return toward Denver, they displayed decreasing figures, suggesting he was still moving in the wrong direction, both temporally and spatially. The fuel gauge remained stuck at the same level, and the landscape continued to reveal unfamiliar features that didn't align with the actual geography of the Colorado Rockies. Growing increasingly desperate, James realized that normal navigation methods were utterly useless in this strange reality. He tried to exit the highway at the next off-ramp, hoping to find a truck stop or rest area for assistance. Unfortunately, the exit ramp led to a road that abruptly ended after a few hundred yards, blocked by an impassable wall of rock and snow. Returning to the highway, he noticed that the mile markers now displayed numbers in the 10s and 20s, continuing their bizarre countdown. The relentless descent into confusion was taking a toll on James's ability to think clearly. After over 6 hours of driving, he found himself no closer to his destination. His logbook required him to take a mandatory break, but the situation made that impossible. When he tried to reach out to his dispatcher, he realized he had no cell signal, despite being in an area that typically had good coverage. His electronic log recorded his driving hours, but the GPS coordinates remained stuck near the Eisenhower Tunnel, as if his truck hadn't moved at all. As dawn approached, James noticed the sky brightening in an unusual way. Instead of the sun rising in the east, the light was coming from the west, leading him to wonder if his compass was broken or if the laws of nature had somehow changed. The mountains cast shadows in bizarre directions, creating a surreal landscape that felt disconnected from reality. In a moment of desperation, James decided to disregard the mile markers and navigation tools altogether. He concentrated on keeping a steady course that felt right, relying on his instincts and years of experience. Speaking aloud, he repeated his name, destination, and cargo details to stay grounded. Slowly, the scenery began to look more familiar. The mile markers showed numbers that started to increase correctly, and his fuel gauge returned to normal. The GPS finally reported accurate coordinates, and the CB radio buzzed back to life with familiar voices discussing road conditions and weather updates. Eventually, James emerged from the mountain loop at a truck stop near Glenwood Springs, over 200 miles from where he thought he should be. According to his electronic logs, he had driven for more than 8 hours, yet his fuel consumption suggested only 2 hours of regular highway driving. The timestamp of his arrival indicated he had somehow traversed an entire night in what felt like mere hours. He completed his delivery to Grand Junction, but never shared his experience in the strange backwards mile marker zone. Though he continued to drive on Interstate 70, he felt a lingering unease whenever he passed through the Eisenhower Tunnel area. He developed new habits, frequently checking his compass and staying in touch with fellow drivers to confirm his location and progress. Years later, he discovered that other drivers had reported similar strange occurrences in the Colorado Rockies, describing stretches of highway where navigation seemed to defy logic and where time and distance played by different rules. While some researchers attributed these experiences to altitude sickness or highway hypnosis, James was certain that what he had faced was real. Though he never encountered the backwards mile markers again, he always made sure to carry extra fuel and emergency supplies when navigating mountain passes. He learned that some roads existed in a realm apart from ordinary reality, where the laws of physics could be bent, and a wrong turn could lead to disorienting hours or even days. Navigating through a landscape that straddled the line between reality and the impossible, the Colorado Rockies held mysteries that maps couldn't reveal and GPS could not decipher. James understood that some journeys demanded more than just mechanical tools. They required faith, resolve, and the insight to recognize when the ordinary world had been left behind, and when survival hinged on finding a path back to roads that adhered to the normal laws of time and space. Clara Thompson had spent 11 years driving commercial trucks across the Deep South when she stumbled upon a truck stop diner on Highway 61 in Mississippi that seemed to exist in a time and place that defied logic. Specializing in long-haul routes through the rural stretches of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, Clara delivered goods to small towns often overlooked by larger shipping firms. She took pride in knowing every truck stop, diner, and fuel station along her regular routes, forging connections with local business owners who valued her reliability and professionalism. On that March evening, Clara was transporting a load of farming equipment from Jackson to Natchez, running a bit behind schedule due to a mechanical hiccup with her refrigeration unit. While the cargo didn't need temperature control, the malfunctioning system was causing electrical issues that affected her dashboard lights and radio reception. Clara intended to have it fixed at her destination, but the intermittent problems were becoming more annoying as darkness descended. Highway 61 through central Mississippi was familiar territory for Clara. Although this stretch was known for its isolation and sparse services, it wound through rural communities divided by vast cotton fields, timber forests, and swampland that had remained largely unchanged since the Civil War. By day, the scenery was serene and picturesque. At night, however, it took on a foreboding quality that often drove drivers to seek alternate routes. As she neared the small community of Vicksburg, her fuel gauge indicated it was time for a diesel stop. Clara had meticulously calculated her fuel consumption and believed she could reach her destination, but the electrical issues were causing erratic gauge readings that made her wary of pressing on without confirming her fuel levels. She began searching for a familiar truck stop to refuel and check her electrical system. Approaching midnight, Clara spotted the warm glow of neon signs ahead, revealing what looked like a vintage truck stop diner. This place seemed to be a throwback to the 1950s, with chrome fixtures, neon lettering, and a parking lot filled with vehicles that belonged to another era. Clara couldn't recall seeing this diner during her previous trips through the area, but she knew that truck stops sometimes changed hands or underwent renovations that could alter their look. As she pulled her truck into the parking lot, an unusual feeling washed over her. The other vehicles were classic models from the 1940s and 1950s, meticulously maintained and shining like they had just rolled off the showroom floor. Several large trucks were parked in the commercial vehicle section, but they too were older models with distinctive designs and setups that hadn't seen production in decades. The diner stood as a quintessential example of mid-century American architecture, flaunting shiny chrome exteriors, expansive windows, and neon signs that painted the parking lot in vibrant hues. Inside, glimpsed through the glass, were red vinyl booths, a checkered floor, and a counter lined with spinning stools that looked like they could have come straight from a Norman Rockwell illustration. Clara parked her truck and strolled toward the diner entrance, acutely aware that her sleek 18-wheeler looked strikingly out of place among the classic cars. As she neared the building, the lively sounds of big band and swing music from the 1940s floated out. It wasn't from a jukebox or a speaker system, but seemed to be live music performed by musicians somewhere within. The door swung open with the familiar chime of a traditional diner bell, and Clara stepped into an environment that whisked her back in time. The interior matched her expectations from the outside, but the meticulous attention to period detail was astonishing. Every light fixture, decoration, and piece of furniture appeared to be genuine 1950s vintage, impeccably preserved with no signs of wear. Inside, the patrons were dressed in styles from the early 50s, with men in suits and ties, despite the late hour, and women in dresses and hairstyles reminiscent of the Eisenhower era. They all seemed to be enjoying their meals and conversations effortlessly, yet something about their demeanor hinted at a disconnect from the present. A waitress approached Clara, clad in a classic uniform complete with a white apron and a matching cap that fit the theme perfectly. Her name tag read Betty, and her cheerful professionalism echoed the service style of a bygone generation. "Welcome to Highway 61 Diner, honey. You look like you could use a hearty meal and a cup of coffee. We've got fresh pie and the best chicken fried steak in Mississippi." Betty's voice carried a subtle regional accent, yet her manner of speaking felt like a throwback to a time when customer service was more formal and gracious. Clara scanned the diner more closely and noticed that none of the other customers seemed to acknowledge her presence. They continued their meals and conversations as if a modern truck driver hadn't just walked in. The men chatted about baseball games, factory jobs, and local politics, referencing events from decades past. "What year is this?" Clara queried Betty, hoping the question wouldn't sound as odd as it felt. Betty smiled and glanced at a calendar behind the counter that read, March 1952. "Why, it's 1952, honey. Has been all year. Are you feeling okay? You look a bit puzzled." Clara's heart raced as the realization hit her. She had somehow stepped into a diner from 1952, despite having just been driving on Highway 61 in the 21st century moments ago. The rational part of her insisted this was impossible, but her senses suggested she had either traveled back in time or entered some alternate dimension. I need to use your telephone," Clara said, hoping to reach her dispatcher or someone who could clarify this bizarre situation. I need to call my... Clara needed to contact the company and inform them of her whereabouts. Betty guided her to a vintage payphone booth tucked away in the corner of the diner, complete with folding doors and a rotary dial. "It'll cost you a nickel for local calls, darling. Long-distance charges vary based on where you're calling," she explained. Clara realized she didn't carry any coins from 1952 and doubted that her modern money would be accepted in this peculiar time. She attempted to use her cell phone, but it showed no signal and was utterly useless in this era devoid of such technology. Returning to the counter, she ordered a cup of coffee, hoping to collect her thoughts and devise a plan to return to her own time. Betty brought her a heavy ceramic mug that epitomized a 1952 diner, and the coffee was rich and flavorful, far surpassing what she was accustomed to in her own time. As Clara sat at the counter, she eavesdropped on the conversations around her, gradually grasping the nature of her temporal displacement. The patrons were discussing events from early 1952 as if they were the latest headlines, such as presidential politics, developments in the Korean War, and local issues that had been resolved decades earlier in Clara's timeline. One man mentioned his job at a cotton mill Clara knew had shut down in the 1970s, while another excitedly talked about seeing a movie released in 1952, now only available in film archives. The diner radiated an authentic 1952 experience, not a nostalgic imitation seen through modern eyes. Clara realized that her modern truck had somehow disrupted the diner's environment. Peering through the windows, she noticed her 18-wheeler causing quite a scene in the parking lot. Vintage cars were skirting around her truck, and a small crowd had gathered outside staring at the anachronistic vehicle that clearly didn't fit into their time. Betty approached Clara, concern etched on her face. "Sweetheart, that truck of yours is causing quite a commotion. Folks here have never seen anything like it." Some are saying it looks like something straight out of a sci-fi flick. Clara understood she had to leave before her presence disrupted the 1952 atmosphere any further. She paid for her coffee with her modern bills, which Betty accepted, albeit with a bewildered look as she examined the unfamiliar designs and security features. As Clara made her way back to her truck, she noticed the vintage cars in the lot starting their engines and leaving, as if their drivers were uneasy about the futuristic technology nearby. The diner patrons peered through the windows, their faces a mix of curiosity and worry. Climbing into her truck, she started the engine, which roared loudly and modern against the backdrop of the 1952 vehicles. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced in her mirrors and saw the diner beginning to fade, as if her departure was causing it to slip back into its original dimension. By the time Clara reached the highway, the diner had vanished completely. She stopped and walked back to where it had stood, only to find an empty field with no trace of the establishment, thereby making it particularly vulnerable to the elements. As Robert drove, the winds picked up and snow began to fall, quickly transforming the landscape into a white blur. Despite the worsening conditions, he remained focused on his mission, determined to deliver the supplies on time. Suddenly, in the middle of the storm, he noticed a figure by the side of the road. It was a woman dressed in clothing that seemed oddly out of place for the harsh winter. Her presence was both haunting and captivating. Robert slowed down, his heart racing as he debated whether to stop. As he approached, the woman raised her hand, signaling for help. He pulled over, and as he stepped out of the truck, the wind howled around him. The woman's face was pale, her eyes filled with an otherworldly glow. She seemed to be shivering, but not from the cold. Robert asked if she needed a ride, but as he spoke, she vanished into thin air, leaving him bewildered and shaken. The encounter left Robert questioning everything he thought he understood about life and death. He continued his journey, but the image of the mysterious woman lingered in his mind. After delivering the medical supplies, he found himself researching the history of the area he'd driven through, uncovering stories of accidents and tragedies along that stretch of Interstate 35. He learned that many had reported seeing apparitions in the area, particularly in severe weather. It seemed that the line between the living and the dead blurred in this part of Kansas, where memories of past tragedies intertwined with the present. Robert never spoke of his experience to other drivers, fearing they would dismiss him as delusional. Yet he carried the memory of that night with him, a reminder that the world holds mysteries beyond comprehension, where the past can momentarily reach out to touch the living. Ideal conditions for blowing snow and ice formation could easily transform a routine drive into a life-or-death situation. Robert had faced winter storms on this route before, but the forecast for this blizzard was unlike any he had ever seen. As he drew closer to the small town of Emporia, the first snowflakes began to splatter against his windshield. In mere moments, the light flurries escalated into a raging blizzard, cutting visibility down to less than 50 feet. The wind howled across the prairie with such intensity that Robert felt his truck being rocked by gusts that seemed ready to shove him off the road. He slowed down and turned on his hazard lights, aware that the next 100 miles would challenge every winter driving skill he had honed over the years. As Robert battled to keep control of his truck amidst the worsening conditions, he noticed headlights appearing in his mirrors. Initially, he felt a wave of relief at the sight of another driver daring enough to brave the storm. Having a fellow traveler on the road during such treacherous weather could mean mutual support in case either vehicle faced trouble. But as the headlights drew nearer, Robert realized he was looking at a full convoy of trucks, at least 8 or 10 vehicles, moving in unison through the tempest. While this was unusual, it wasn't unheard of. Truckers often formed informal convoys during severe weather for safety, sharing vital information about road conditions and offering help to anyone facing mechanical issues or getting stranded. Hoping to coordinate their travel and exchange updates on road conditions, Robert attempted to reach out to the convoy via his CB radio. Northbound convoy, behind the medical supply truck. This is your lead vehicle. What is your 20, and what are your intentions for this storm? He tried multiple times, but the radio fell silent. Although he could see the convoy maintaining a consistent distance behind him, none of the trucks responded to his calls. It was puzzling. Typically, successful convoy coordination relied on constant radio communication to ensure safe spacing and provide assistance. As the storm worsened, Robert noticed something unsettling about the vehicles trailing him. Their headlights seemed unusually dim and diffused, as if struggling to break through the swirling snow, despite being so close. What was even more alarming was that he couldn't discern any details about the trucks themselves, even though they were near enough for him to identify their make and model. Robert decided to slow down even more and activated his flashers to gauge the convoy's reaction. In normal circumstances, following vehicles would respond to such signals with their own lights or radio messages. But the enigmatic convoy continued at the same speed and distance, showing no visible acknowledgement of his actions. As Robert approached the town of Wichita, the blizzard reached its peak intensity. Visibility had plummeted to 0, forcing him to navigate solely by the reflective markers on the roadside guardrails. The wind was creating drifts that began to obstruct parts of the highway, and Robert understood that pressing on any further would be perilously unsafe for any driver. He made the decision to exit the highway and seek. He decided to take shelter at a truck stop until the storm passed. As he activated his turn signal and began to slow down for the exit, he glanced in his mirrors and noticed that the convoy behind him wasn't following suit. Their headlights continued to blaze straight down the highway, showing no signs of slowing or changing direction. It was as if the drivers were oblivious to his intentions or trapped in their predetermined path. Robert parked at the truck stop and walked back toward the highway, hoping to catch a glimpse of the convoy pushing through the storm. Through the swirling snow, he spotted their faint headlights fading into the distance, maintaining their formation despite the visibility conditions that should have deterred any sensible driver from proceeding. Inside the truck stop diner, Robert found he wasn't alone in seeking refuge from the storm. Several other truckers were waiting for the weather to improve, exchanging stories about the treacherous driving they had faced that evening. When Robert inquired about the convoy that had been tailing him, none of the drivers reported seeing any vehicles on the highway during the storm. In a corner booth sat an elderly driver named Carl Thompson, nursing a cup of coffee and gazing out at the blizzard. Robert approached him and shared details about the convoy he had encountered, hoping to gain some perspective on his experience. Carl looked up, his weary eyes hinting at a depth of knowledge beyond ordinary trucking tales. "Son, how many trucks were in that convoy?" "8 or 10, Robert replied, "all driving in perfect formation, even with the storm raging." Carl nodded slowly. "Aye, and they didn't respond to any CB radio calls?" "No, they stayed completely silent despite multiple attempts to reach them." Carl fell silent for a few moments before motioning for Robert to take a seat across from him. 23 years ago, during a blizzard like this, a convoy of 8 trucks was trapped in white-out conditions on Interstate 35, about 50 miles north of here. They were delivering relief supplies to communities cut off by the storm. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather crept over Robert. What happened to them? They refused to stop, convinced that people depended on their deliveries. The entire convoy hit a patch of black ice and jackknifed into a catastrophic pileup. All 8 drivers perished in the crash. Their bodies weren't recovered until 3 days later when the storm finally cleared. Carl continued, his tone suggesting he'd recounted this tale many times before. Since then, other drivers have claimed to see the phantom convoy during severe winter storms on Interstate 35. They always travel the same route they took when they died. Some believe they're still trying to complete their delivery mission. Even from beyond, Robert stared out at the storm, recalling the dim headlights that had trailed him through the blizzard. "Do you think they're still out there right now?" "I believe some drivers are so dedicated to their duties that even death doesn't stop them from fulfilling their obligations," Carl replied. "They continue on the same routes, hauling the same cargo, and sticking to the same schedules they had in life." Robert spent the night at the truck stop, waiting out the storm and reflecting on the convoy that had braved the blizzard alongside him. As dawn broke and the snow ceased, he set off once more toward Oklahoma City, managing to deliver the medical supplies on time despite the weather setbacks. In the years that followed, Robert encountered the mysterious phantom convoy several times during harsh winter storms on Interstate 35. Each experience unfolded similarly. 8 to 10 trucks would materialize behind him in treacherous conditions, moving in flawless formation and keeping radio silence until he found shelter, at which point they would press on into the storm without a pause. Robert grew to appreciate the phantom convoy's presence, believing that the spirits of deceased drivers were watching over the living truckers brave enough to navigate perilous roads. He felt the convoy symbolized a commitment that transcended death, showcasing how the dedication to delivering crucial supplies could forge connections that lingered beyond the grave. After retiring from long-haul trucking, Robert continued to tune in to CB radio chatter during winter storms, eager to hear reports from fellow drivers who crossed paths with the phantom convoy. The accounts were always the same: 8 trucks moving in perfect alignment, maintaining silence, and vanishing when living drivers sought refuge from the dangerous weather. The phantom convoy became a staple of folklore among truckers on Interstate 35 during winter, with seasoned drivers cautioning newcomers about the possibility of an encounter. They explained that these ghostly trucks posed no threat. Instead, they served as a reminder that the spirits of devoted drivers were still watching over the highway, continuing their mission to deliver what had cost them their lives. To Robert, the phantom convoy epitomized the ultimate dedication of truckers, drivers so committed to their duties that they persevered even after death, offering unseen support to those who faced the same hazardous conditions that once claimed them. The convoy stood as both a warning about the perils of winter driving and a tribute to the unbreakable bond among truckers dedicated to keeping America's freight moving, regardless of personal sacrifice. Some roads carry memories of sacrifice that defy time and mortality, and Interstate 35 through Kansas was one such highway where the deceased continued to assist the living, with phantom headlights guiding them through storms that could prove fatal if faced alone. Vernon Blake had been hauling commercial trucks across the mid-Atlantic for 13 years when he received a CB transmission on Interstate 77 in Virginia that challenged everything he thought he knew about time and causality. Known for his meticulous safety protocols and his willingness to share road condition updates, Vernon maintained regular communication with dispatchers and fellow truckers, building a reputation for reliability that earned him steady work, transporting high-value cargo through some of the East Coast's toughest terrains. On that memorable April evening, Vernon was transporting a load of pharmaceutical products from Richmond to Charleston, sticking closely to his schedule despite earlier setbacks due to construction on Interstate 64. The cargo required careful handling and temperature control to ensure the medications reached hospitals and pharmacies across the Carolinas without damage. Vernon took great pride in these deliveries, fully aware that any delays could mean life or death for patients waiting for critical treatments. As he drove along the familiar stretch of Interstate 77 through southern Virginia, he navigated the challenging terrain and unpredictable weather typical of the area. The highway wound through the scenic Blue Ridge Mountains, featuring steep climbs and sharp turns that demanded constant focus and skilled driving. Springtime brought sudden thunderstorms that could turn a routine drive into a treacherous ordeal. Approaching the small town of Hillsville, Vernon's CB radio crackled to life with a message that instantly captured his attention. The voice was clear and authoritative, delivered with the calm precision that seasoned truckers used for critical safety alerts. Northbound pharmaceutical hauler at mile marker 78. This is your future self calling from tomorrow morning at 0630 hours. You need to exit at Route 58 and take the alternate route through Stewart. Do not continue on Interstate 77 past mile marker 85. A chill coursed through Vernon as he processed the transmission. The message pinpointed him as the pharmaceutical hauler and specified his exact location, which was unsettling enough. But the assertion that it came from his future self hinted at some bizarre form of time communication that defied logic. Cautiously, Vernon keyed his microphone. "The unknown station. This is the northbound pharmaceutical hauler. Can you identify yourself and clarify your message?" He listened intently for a response, switching through other CB frequencies to check if this was some elaborate prank by fellow drivers. The reply came swiftly in a voice that sounded eerily familiar, his own, but laced with an exhaustion and distress he had never heard before. Of Vernon Blake of Norfolk, Virginia. "This is you from 12 hours in the future. At mile marker 85, there will be a catastrophic bridge collapse triggered by a propane truck explosion. The incident will happen at 22:47 hours, in exactly 37 minutes. If you stay on your current path, you will be caught in the collapse and will not survive." Vernon's hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. The voice on the radio was unmistakably his, complete with his regional accent and speech patterns no one else could mimic. The specific details about his identity and location were information no one else should have had. "This has to be some kind of sick joke," he transmitted, though doubt seeped into his voice. "There's no way someone could be talking to me from the future." The response was immediate and urgent, sending a wave of ice through his veins. "I'm not joking, Vernon. I'm speaking to you from—" Vernon found himself in communication with his future self. The urgency in that voice pressed on. "You need to act now to avert the disaster. If you can alert the authorities or step in somehow, you could save lives. Keep in mind, the truck will be coming in from the right and the driver won't be able to regain control." An adrenaline rush coursed through Vernon as the weight of the situation sank in. Time was of the essence, and he had to move fast. Authentic warnings from the future. The explosion would be so powerful that it would disrupt the entire bridge structure. The voice continued. "The span will collapse in mere seconds, sending several vehicles plummeting into the river below. Emergency response will take over an hour, as the wreckage will block access from both sides." Vernon was nearing the Route 58 exit that his supposed future self had suggested as an alternative route. The choice he made in the next few minutes would decide whether he stayed on Interstate 77 toward the predicted disaster or opted for the longer detour through Stewart, which would add 2 hours to his delivery time. Exactly 15 minutes after the warning about the propane truck, Vernon saw a red commercial vehicle merging onto the highway from the Route 52 on-ramp. The truck was indeed carrying propane, as indicated by the hazardous materials placards on its tank trailer. Vernon felt a growing sense of dread as he noticed the truck weaving slightly between lanes, hinting that the driver was in medical distress. He made his choice. He took the Route 58 exit, embarking on the longer route through Stewart, accepting the delay in his delivery schedule to avoid the looming catastrophe. As he navigated the mountain roads, he kept an ear on CB radio chatter for updates about conditions on Interstate 77. At precisely 224 hours, Vernon heard emergency reports on multiple CB channels about a massive explosion and bridge collapse on Interstate 77 at mile marker 85. Several truckers confirmed that a propane truck had exploded after colliding with bridge supports, causing the entire span to crash into the river below. Emergency responders confirmed that 3 commercial drivers had perished in the collapse, along with several other vehicles involved in subsequent accidents triggered by the structural failure. The highway would be closed for weeks as investigators examined the cause of the accident and engineers evaluated the damage to the bridge. Vernon completed his delivery to Charleston, arriving 2 hours late, but grateful to be alive. He had witnessed the most compelling evidence that he had indeed received a genuine warning from his future self, transmitted through a mysterious means that allowed communication across time. In the days that followed, Vernon researched the bridge collapse and found that the events unfolded exactly as his CB transmission had predicted. The propane truck driver had suffered a fatal heart attack while driving, losing consciousness and crashing into the bridge supports. The explosion had been so fierce that it obliterated the bridge structure within seconds. Although Vernon never received another message from his future self, he began to pay closer attention to unusual CB radio communications, realizing that the highways of America held mysteries beyond the typical understanding of time and space. He shared his story with fellow drivers, though most dismissed it as mere coincidence or highway hypnosis. Vernon discovered that certain events created ripples in time, allowing information to flow backward, presenting opportunities for those willing to heed warnings from futures yet to unfold in their current timeline. The CB radio had transformed into a channel for temporal communication, enabling his future self to reach out 12 hours to avert a tragedy that had already unfolded in an alternate timeline. Vernon wrapped up his trucking career without experiencing any further temporal communications, yet he remained vigilant for unusual CB signals, aware that the highways were filled with mysteries linking past, present, and future in ways that defied logic. He kept his radio tuned to Channel 19, always prepared to receive or relay warnings that could save lives by transcending the conventional limits of time and causality. Although the bridge on Interstate 77 was eventually rebuilt, Vernon never took that route again, opting instead for the longer mountain roads that had spared him when he chose to heed a warning from the future and sidestep a disaster that had already been averted in his timeline. Diane Foster had been driving commercial trucks with her husband, Michael, across the Pacific Northwest for 7 years when they stumbled upon a rest area on Interstate 84 in Oregon that seemed to exist in a space between dimensions, where time flowed differently. As a husband and wife team, they alternated driving shifts to enhance their efficiency and income, while enjoying the companionship that made long-haul trucking more bearable. They specialized in transporting electronic shipments from California to distribution centers across Oregon and Washington, earning a reputation for reliability that led to consistently high-value contracts. On that particular September evening, Diane and Michael were transporting a load of computer components from San Jose to Portland, running slightly ahead of schedule thanks to favorable traffic and perfect weather. Michael had just finished his driving shift and was resting in the sleeper berth while Diane navigated the stunning Columbia River Gorge, one of the most picturesque stretches of Interstate 84. The highway traced the Columbia River through a dramatic canyon sculpted by millions of years of water erosion, creating a landscape that felt almost surreal in its beauty. Diane loved driving through the gorge, particularly in the evening when the setting sun bathed the canyon walls in brilliant shades of orange and red. Although the route posed challenges with its steep grades and strong crosswinds, the breathtaking scenery made every effort worthwhile. Having driven this stretch of highway hundreds of times, Diane was intimately familiar with the locations of every rest area, scenic overlook, and truck-friendly fuel stop. As she approached 11 p.m., she noticed signs for a rest area that she didn't recall from her previous trips through the area. The blue rectangular signs appeared at the usual intervals, indicating restroom facilities, picnic tables, and parking for both commercial and passenger vehicles. However, the name of this rest area was unfamiliar, and Diane took pride in knowing every stop along her regular routes. Needing to take her mandatory break, the timing was perfect for a rest stop that would allow her to complete her required off-duty time before continuing to Portland. She activated her turn signal and began to slow down to exit the highway, noting that the rest area looked well-maintained and well-lit despite its remote location in the Columbia River Gorge. It was larger and more elaborate than most facilities she had encountered on Interstate 84. Diane glanced at Sarah, who was casually scrolling on her smartphone, and replied, "It's 2023. A chill crept down Diane's spine. The strange atmosphere combined with Sarah's serene demeanor made her start to doubt her grip on reality. "Are you sure?" Diane asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, her smile unwavering. "Absolutely. Time flies when you're at the Columbia Gorge rest area." Diane surveyed her surroundings, the blend of different eras and the surreal vibe swirling in her thoughts. "I really need to hit the road," she said, trying to push away the rising unease. "Of course," Sarah responded. "Safe travels, and remember, we're always here if you need to take a break." As Diane turned to leave, her heart raced, caught in a space where the familiar met the utterly bizarre. Desk displaying September 1987. It's indeed 1987, but given the variety of visitors from different eras, I can see how the date might be confusing. A shiver ran down Diane's spine as she realized she had stumbled into a rest area that transcended the usual flow of time. The other travelers she noticed weren't your typical late-night highway patrons. They were individuals from various time periods who had somehow found their way to this interdimensional stop. Stepping outside, Diane began to scrutinize the other visitors. A family with young kids was enjoying a picnic at one of the pavilions, their retro clothing and vintage station wagon clearly marking them as products of the 1960s. An elderly couple sat on a bench, feeding ducks by a small pond. Their formal attire and mannerisms suggested they belonged to an even earlier time. Most unsettling was a group of young people animatedly discussing events that hadn't happened yet in Diane's timeline. They spoke of technological advancements and political developments slated for the years ahead, as if they were travelers from her own future who had somehow arrived at this temporal crossroads. Diane hurried back to her truck, eager to wake Michael and share her astonishing observations, hoping he could shed light on this bizarre rest area. But when she entered the sleeper berth, she found it empty. Michael's belongings were still neatly in place, with no sign he had left the truck willingly. Panic set in as she searched the entire rest area, calling out for her husband and asking other travelers if they had seen him. None seemed to grasp the urgency of her situation. Several even suggested she wait for him to return when he was ready. A man in his 60s, dressed in a 1950s suit and tie, approached her with a sympathetic look. "Are you searching for someone, dear? People often get separated here because time flows differently for each visitor." "What do you mean time flows differently?" Diane asked, her initial curiosity giving way to fear. The man explained patiently, as if he had repeated this to many bewildered travelers over the years. "This rest area exists in a space outside of normal time. Some arrive from the past, others from the future, and some from alternate present realities. The time you spend here may not align with the time passing in your original timeline." Diane's heart raced as she realized she might be caught in a temporal anomaly, one that could prevent her from returning to her own time. This rest area could be an interdimensional trap, ensnaring travelers from various eras and keeping them confined in a realm detached from the typical flow of causality. Determined to test the man's claims, she decided to attempt leaving the rest area and getting back to Interstate 84. However, as she approached the parking area, she discovered that the entrance road had vanished, where it once connected to the highway. Instead, she was met with a dense forest that appeared untouched for centuries. The highway was nowhere to be seen, and the familiar sounds of traffic had been replaced by the gentle whispers of wind and the calls of wildlife, echoing a world far removed from her own. In a pristine wilderness setting, Diane found herself trapped at a rest area with no clear way to return to her own timeline. She wandered the facility for hours, searching for any exit that might lead her back to reality. The other visitors seemed unfazed by their situation, engaging in conversations and activities that suggested they had been there for an eternity, untouched by time or aging. As dawn broke, Diane noticed the landscape around the rest area shifting. The thick forest that had previously blocked her path was thinning out, revealing the distant hum of traffic that hinted at Interstate 84 resuming its usual place. Fueled by hope, she dashed toward the spot where the access road had vanished, watching as the pavement gradually reappeared, reconnecting the rest area to the highway. Her truck sat exactly where she had left it, and through the windshield she spotted Michael waking up from his nap. Diane quickly hopped into the passenger seat just as Michael began to stretch and prepare for his driving shift. He glanced at his watch, confirming that enough time had passed for her break, even though it felt to her like she had spent hours lost in that strange place. How was your break?" Michael asked, eyeing her curiously. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Diane turned to look back at the rest area, which was quickly fading from view, becoming less tangible with each passing moment. Within minutes, the elaborate structure had vanished completely, leaving only an empty field in its wake. "I'm not quite sure what happened," she admitted candidly. "I think I might have been dreaming." After they completed their delivery to Portland on schedule, Diane spent the following days delving into the history of Interstate 84 and the Columbia River Gorge. To her surprise, she found no record of any rest area at the spot where she'd stopped, nor any evidence that such a facility had ever existed. However, she uncovered scattered accounts from other travelers who spoke of a mysterious rest area that appeared and disappeared along Interstate 84. These stories spanned decades, all describing a place that seemed to exist outside the constraints of time, where visitors from various eras converged in a space that defied temporal limits. Diane never came across the interdimensional rest area again, despite driving through the Columbia River Gorge regularly for the rest of her trucking career. She learned that some places exist in the gaps between ordinary reality, serving as waypoints for those needing rest during journeys that transcended time and space. This experience opened her eyes to the idea that America's highways connected more than just geographical locations. They were also pathways for temporal travel, allowing those attuned to such phenomena to glimpse the endless possibilities that lay beyond the linear flow of human experience.